Well, it's been a few days because I got caught up doing a bunch of different stuff. Part of that was prep for this last Thursday and Friday, which I ended up going to Fort Worth. I drove the L122 Coleman conversion up there, and it was the IHCC Winter Convention, the Nationwide International Harvester Collector Club. And this year, the Lone Star Chapter 25 hosted it. It was the first time they've hosted a national event, so I had to be there. But it was really cool because I got to see a bunch of tractors. Actually, by the time this comes out, my visit to that will actually probably be the previous video. Anyway, before I left for that, I did take the time to put the radiator in, replace hoses. Hydraulic pump is cleaned up, reinstalled. I'm not making this a really super in-depth, but every step of getting the H in good health. But one of the big things I need to do is I need to replace this distributor setup. This is the IH horizontal distributor setup. I need to put in the AC Delco vertical distributor, the upright, because that gives me the clearance to put the Balin power steering pump in here. These are the lines for the pump. They're capped off. Just waiting for me to get it reinstalled. Now I've gone through and I have cleaned the pump. I've cleaned out the distributor. So, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. I get to leave the distributor drive in there, even though I cleaned up the one that was on the tractor before. There's no real need to take this thing off. Just, it doesn't seem to be leaking, so I'm gonna leave it. Power steering pump, distributor. Let's get this done. So with the distributor removed, we've got this, had a big chunk of, it looked like oily grease. Actually looked like a bunch of junk that was in there. So I've been cleaning this out a little bit. I am gonna put some grease in there just to minimize any wear on the pump drive. Here's some gaskets I made for this whole operation. So first in is a pump. Pump is right here. Got her pretty much cleaned up. Clean enough for what I need to do right now. I have to add the one line, this line, but because it doesn't have a swivel, I've got to add that before I install the pump. So enough talking, I'm just gonna do this. All right, with this thing apart, I just want to show you something really quick. Is this. There's a little bit of slack in this. There's a little bit of back and forth. Now that's not critically important at this point, but I just want you to observe this before we start timing the motor. Now the grease I'm going to put in here just to minimize wear, like I said. I've got this Rotella extra tacky grease, and this, I actually picked this out to go inside the distributor drive, the base of the distributor. I'm going to show you in a minute, but this is some really tacky stuff. It's a little thinner than chassis grease, so I think it works good for something like this. But I'm just going to put a little bit in here just to cushion the drive gear, because as you see, it does have some give in it, so we don't want it to be banging on bare metal. We're not trying to get carried away and put too much in here, just enough. Now I wanted to get that greased before I started putting this all together, because once I have the hose on here, it's, you know, I've only got so many hands. I always try to look forward a step or two. It usually makes the end result a little easier. So speaking of which, be a great time to put some pipe dope on this hose before I install it. Now, of course, with hydraulic fittings, you don't want to use Teflon tape, because it can get inside the hydraulic system and like little shreds of it can tear up your pump. But I know some people do like to use it and then go back a few threads so it's just not as exposed. But really the preferred method is to use some petroleum safe pipe dope. Oh, don't need to get carried away. I'll wipe off some of that. At least I don't have to worry about it running all over, huh? That is thick. Like I said, it doesn't have a swivel fitting, so I've got to put it on the pump like this, like a total goofball. I'll try to get the bottom bolt in there first. I can get rid of that distributor cap there. He's out. You're out. Lower bolt is in, or at least threaded. Upper bolt. Get that in and start it on the thread. Okay. This lower one is a real treat because you can barely get a wrench on it. It's too close to get a socket or a ratcheting box end. So you just gotta grab it when you can with what you got. With this one, since it's so hard to get in there, sometimes I can only get it sideways with a wrench like this. You don't have enough torque with your hands just to do it, so I get the crescent wrench and use that to turn the wrench itself. Okay, tighten up the top. Pull out this plug here. She wants to drip some oil because why wouldn't it? But that's a good sign. Get the hose plug off of this guy coming from the reservoir. So this is the suction line and this is the pressure line. Now let's get the pipe dope on that. It's only gonna help. That's all it really takes. All you really need. Spread it around. Fun story, but when I was 19 years old, I had just moved to Texas for I don't know how many months, maybe 6 months. I was a pipe fitter's helper in Fort Worth, building fire sprinklers. So I got a lot of time running a pipe threading machine, and I've never forgotten the correct way to put pipe dope on stuff and put Teflon tape on, which is, I think I'll make a video about a few shop tricks that have helped me over the years, that I've either learned from some wise old timer or I figured out myself. Nice and tight. We've got power steering, I hope. I gotta fill the reservoir, but other than that, we should be hot to go. Now it's distributor time. Now the AC Delco upright distributor comes in two pieces. You have the right angle drive, and then you have the actual distributor. And the distributor comes in and drives off that helical gear right there. And I know it looks kind of weird and crusty, but it's actually, I got everything out of that I could. So this is actually where I got the ultra tacky grease for, because I want this thing to have the nicest constant contact of lightweight cushiony grease. I was gonna go with just normal lithium grease. So this one has extreme temperature protection, heavy duty, high temperature, lithium complex, water resistant, and it's extra tacky. Right there, extra tacky. Maybe I need to put truck nuts on this thing to match the grease. Know what I'm saying? Okay. All right, so I'm just gonna put some of this grease in here now. I'm putting this in here now just because when I get it on here, it gets a little tight. Now with this one, I am gonna put some extra grease in here because I want it to, when it's spinning, as it spins, you know, this stuff will be slinging around, and I'd like for it to always have something to fall back on. As in, the grease will start slawing around, and it'll, you know, as it warms up, it'll fall back on itself. And it's a very small little area in there, but it's enough of a cavity that it can get away from you, or get away from the gears. So that's what we're gonna do. We're just gonna squirt her in there, stuff it in. That should be more than enough. Some might say that's too much, but I think it's just enough. Okay, so get this distributor out of here so it doesn't fall. And this guy, it also has the same drive that the hydraulic pump has, or more accurately, the hydraulic pump has the same drive as the distributor. So I am going to put some grease on this as well, just to keep that nice and cushion any blows. I'm really not putting that much in here. I'm just trying to cover the teeth, these two teeth. And let me just get this thing sorted out because, and by the way, this oil that's dripping, if you're watching that, that is actually from the oil that spilled out of this thing. It's not actively leaking out of a hose or anything. So the hose is sealed, the pipe dope is doing its job. Get this gasket on here. Man, somebody made really nice gaskets for this thing. It's probably really handsome too. Now this one, it's different than this one because the adjustments at the bottom on this pump, the adjustments on top. It's really 6 of one, half a dozen the other. Doesn't really matter. You want to have it just tipped in so it's not going to hit the tin. It's an AC Delco distributor, so there's basically infinite adjust for timing on the top. You can spin it in a circle for days. The only thing you want to, you know, be sure of is to have the coil wire easily accessible. But you know, once you get a quarter turn, you can change all the wires anyway. If that doesn't make sense, hopefully it will in a minute. Let me get some bolts on this guy. All right, so the top one, of course, is a big old pain in the butt. So that being a pain in the butt reminds me of one of my dad's favorite jokes, and that was the guy goes to the dentist, and the dentist says, well, you know, the only thing I'd like to see is that you start flossing more, because I can tell you're not flossing much. The guy says, oh man, doc, I don't need to be flossing. I hate that flossing. Flossing's such a pain in the butt. And the dentist looks at him and he's like, well, if that's the case, you're probably doing it wrong. Hey. I think I've got this adjusted so that the distributor's out of the way of the sheet metal. So I'm just going to tighten this thing up now. and then I can change it if I have to. But like I said, all of your timing adjustment should come from twisting it. It's an AC Delco. I mean, it's the same as the trucks. And if you've never timed the trucks, really, once you find number one, you can always just rearrange the spark plug wires to match what you need it to do, if that makes sense. I hope it makes sense. I just feel like I'm talking a lot if it's not making sense. Now, I probably should have done this before I put it on there, but there's this end cap that goes on here. Now, 2 of these bolts share the strap for the ignition coil. So I'm just going to put the lower bolt in here just to hold it in place, like so. And I am going to use the ignition coil that was on here, that was on this motor, not the one that came with this, if I can get it to fit, because this is pretty tight clearance here. But the reason I'm doing that is because the ignition coil, yeah, that's not going to fit. It is tight, real tight. So the reason I wanted to use this ignition coil is because I know it works, for one, and two, it's the one that was on here fell while I was working on some stuff out here, and so I don't know if I trust it. But it looks like I might just be trying another coil because that one doesn't fit. So let's see what I got in my parts boxes over there. I've got so many parts. It's almost embarrassing. Let me thread one of these in here just so when I tighten down this bottom one, I know that they're lined up. She just threaded in there just so we know. Okay, she's in there tight. So now let's find a coil for this thing. This thing is going to have a 12-volt conversion, and I'll get into that in the next video. I'm going to do a video I'm going to do a series of videos about the 12-volt conversion. I've had a lot of requests to do that, and so that is coming. But this video is going to be long enough without it, so I'm actually not even going to hook up a charging system with this thing. But I am running this thing with a 12-volt battery, which means that whatever coil I have on here, unless it has an internal resistor, which that type of coil I never buy, I always have a ballast resistor. And the reason for that is, especially on the trucks, you can install a hot start relay. All of this I'll get into in some future videos, but on the tractors, you don't really need a hot start relay because you can even hand crank this one if you wanted to. So all I'm getting at right now, I'm taking a roundabout way of getting to this point, but the actual point I'm trying to make is nowadays, a lot of people use electronic ignition, which almost kind of sounds redundant, but you know, they try to eliminate using points and condensers and all that. Now, that's fine. I have nothing against people doing that, but it's also, I don't like to do that just because I grew up running points, and if you're good at setting up points, they last just fine. And I've had electronic ignition fail on people's tractors that I've worked on, and it strains you unless you have a set of points in the toolbox. I'm getting off on a tangent still. I'm explaining this too much. Basically what I'm saying is that the one strike I see against using points nowadays is that the points that you get, the materials that they're made out of, the points, the condensers especially, and the coils especially, all these things are not the quality that they used to be, and it's noticeable. So my point in saying all of that is to say that the coils that I find are the most reliable are the standard brand or Blue Streak. So I think the one for a 12-volt that I use on all my trucks, and I'll use on this probably, is a UC14X, I believe is the model number. If I'm saying that wrong, I'll put the correction on the screen. If I'm saying it right, I'll repeat it on the screen so you can read it and order the right one if you want it. All right, well, I thought I had a blue streak one around here, but next best thing is to find an old one that YouTube will probably tell you, the comment warriors will tell me this one won't work, so they could be right. But I like to bet on myself and about ridiculous things. I could use a little bit of a cleanup. All right, so the secret weapon to running point ignition, or even distributor ignition, I think, is one of these. This is a Milwaukee cordless Dremel tool. And get a wire brush on it. Cleans all that stuff right up. And I'll tell you, this is, hold on. You don't need it real fast. And wear eye protection. Inside that thing looks pretty good. So, see about, probably should have checked if this thing fit. But it looks like it'll fit just fine, doesn't it? Looks like I might even have extra room. I say that, but with this strap, yeah, see. Let's get this thing strapped in. I gotta open this up a little bit to get her in there. So this coil is gonna be right here. Nice and tight, right in there. Kissing the oil filter, honestly. Right like so. Now, does it matter which way I put the coil? Not really, but for my own convenience, I try to have the distributor wire on the outside where you can see it. So we're running a 12 volt system now. If this was a 6 volt positive ground system, you would come from the switch to the negative and ground and take the positive going to the distributor, because the current passing through this thing is headed to ground. So whatever polarity you use for ground, it flows in that direction. So this is going to be a 12 volt negative ground. So I'm going to loosen this and spin it around so that when it's sitting like this, the part that's going to the distributor is on the outside. Now I can push this thing up through here to get a little more clearance on it. Like so. Tighten her down. Oh, I totally should have done this before I installed it. That breather tube housing is in the way. Not fun. Actually, what I'll do is I'll just take the distributor out, I think, and put it in. Okay, so that's together. Again, negative side out just for convenience. Seat her down in there. Okay. Now, I'll actually pull this one off. Get in there so I can tighten up this coil. I definitely took a convoluted route to get this done. All right, time for the distributor. Some extra tacky on here. just so that we're everywhere with it. There it is. And we're going to put it like this because there's my distributor to coil wire right there. And I can move it any way I need to. So let me clean up my hands and we'll keep moving on this. Here with the Delco distributor mounted, I don't have the hold down hardware on it yet. That's not important at this step. But the point I'd like to express with the distributor at this point is how useful one of these is. I'm not getting endorsed by Milwaukee. I feel like I probably should for what I'm trying to sell you on right here. But with a distributor like this, I don't have a new set of points for it. I don't have a new condenser. I don't have a new distributor cap. But what I do have is this. I'm pretty well versed with Delco distributors because all my international trucks have them. The great thing about this is that you can actually burnish points, and burnishing points is far superior to filing points because filing points, you'll never actually get them perfectly flat. But with burnishing them, you have a much better result. So the first step is to remove these points. I'll reinstall them, but I have to get them out to burnish them. A screwdriver like this really helps, with where it can just grip the screws. So especially down in the motor bay of a truck, but a tractor helps too because then you can get it set on the screwdriver and get it started. But don't lose these because if you don't have a bunch of spare distributor parts, that can ruin your day quickly. Another great set of tools to invest in is ignition wrenches. I carry all my ignition tools. They're just little miniature wrenches and feeler gauges, point files. These are made for working on ignitions. So inside a distributor, because if you're trying to do this with a needle nose pliers, you're gonna mess everything up. It's just gonna be a bad result. Now the old point sets will come off in two pieces. You have the lower part and the upper part. You just got to kind of work this one off the pivot shaft there. So you can see those points are pretty crusty. So we get out the Dremel. And like I said before, you don't want to go fast and you want to wear eye protection because these little guys will fly off of here. Now it really seems to help to do a few different angles at them. It really helps clean them up more. Now these points are never going to be perfect. Let's see if I can. It's never going to be perfect, but it'll be a lot better than it was, obviously. That's enough to fire. So we'll get this guy in there. I like to use a screwdriver and just kind of push it down in there. There it is. That found home. Honestly, let's do this right. Let's just clean her out. Let's get it all sorted out. We can clean this all up. Get the guy off this end, it'll all come out. Okay. we got that out enough. Gotta get these two screws off, which conveniently hold the clips. Now removing those, and this last one here. Clean that out a little bit. There she goes. Now I can grab this whole breaker plate and pull it out. This stuff is out. We're just gonna do it right. So by pulling this out, we can see how dirty it is underneath. And like my 51M that I did a series of rebuild videos on a few months back, I pulled this stuff out and it was just disgustingly dirty on the inside. There are your centrifugal advance weights. And you get in there and look at the springs, clean everything out. I'll just pull all that out. And to get these out, you have to bend down. There's a tab there, and you can see, well, let's see here. You can see a tab right there, and you got to bend those down to get these nuts out. Okay, so there's a distributor shaft, and it is dirty, quite dirty. Centrifugal weights, 2 per side. The rest of that down there looks pretty good. So it's actually pretty clean in there. But I will still clean these up and we'll get back into it. All right, she's all cleaned up. Start putting stuff back in there. Now that looks good. I just gotta oil it. You want that stuff nice and smooth. One. Dab of oil in there. Well, and those guys not to get carried away. I'm gonna get it in between the weights, underneath the weights. You don't want them wearing. Really, just a little bit of oil goes a long way in here. You just don't want them scraping. So I put some oil inside the shaft there, and it's coming out of my pants. That's great. So that goes down there. All right. So now, got this plate I've got all cleaned up. Okay, time for the springs to go back in. Let's see, now the springs. Now these springs seem a little wimpy to me, but the tractors and the trucks have to advance at different speed ranges. So it's important that they have the right amount of springiness to them. Tension, as it were, if you're a scientist. If for some reason the tractor is having a hard time getting out of its own way, it's just not advancing right, if it's stumbling, then I'll go back through here and I'll replace these springs. So now it's time for the The keepers and the nuts. Those. You can bend those tabs back. All right, with the keeper tabs in place, we can put the breaker plate back in there. All right, with the weight assembly installed, it's just the distributor shaft clean. I've cleaned the breaker plate. Now the breaker plate, I like to go through here on these tabs that connect it to the inner body of the distributor, and I like to wire brush these just lightly, but they normally, when you take this apart, it'll normally have a little bit of rust here and there. And this is where it contacts, and like I said, the electricity flowing through this goes to ground, so this will work better if it can reach ground more efficiently. With that said, I go through and I clean up my condenser. I'm going to reuse this condenser, see what it does. But I also like to wire brush where it connects there to the breaker plate, because I'll clean up the body of the condenser and I'll clean up the strap that connects to the breaker plate here. All that makes a difference. You want this thing to ground effortlessly. You don't want any resistance. Now I know that may sound a little bit like overkill, but the fact of the matter is, whenever you start having problems, electrical problems, and they feel like it's just a ghost in the machine, like you can't figure it out, it doesn't seem to make much sense, it's typically a sum of several things, several bad grounds, several bad connections, or maybe a short. And that's why whenever I take anything apart that's electrical, I spend extra time going through and making sure everything's clean, everything's a good connection. And man, I'll tell you, I don't have any electrical problems ever. Anything worth doing is worth overdoing, and electrical stuff embodies that philosophy. Okay, so now if you take this thing apart, if you've got one of these and you take it apart and you don't remember which way these clips go, this one has a indexing mark on it that corresponds with a divot in the housing. And that's important because this corresponds with a indentation in the distributor cap. And sometimes, just to get all these screws started correctly and not strip any threads, it helps to start all these, leave them loose, and then get them all threaded and then tighten them all down. Man, this is looking like a different distributor. We're gonna go in and put this guy in, but I'm gonna clean him up first. It's like a theme. And again, this is where this guy comes in handy so much. With threads that small, threads like that are that small, you can round those off, wear them down with a full-size bench grinder easily. Set that guy right there for now. Eye protection. Okay, that guy's ready to go in. There's a square indentation on the inside, and this pops through here. Sits on its side like that. Now that I've got this through the body of the distributor here, there's these two washers that go on it. This one is Bakelite. So this insulates this. If this is missing on yours, you're gonna have to find something else, either a piece of plastic, nylon, or I guess even rubber. I'd probably stick with nylon or something, a little hardier. Here's just a steel washer. It doesn't necessarily have to be that clean on the sides because it's only making an electrical connection right here. And then we have a nut. Now the nut, we do want to clean up at least one side of it. And just so you know, if this was a restoration, obviously we'd be going through here and making everything perfect. But this is a working tractor, and I'm not doing anything to it that isn't going to really help its functionality. All right, so I have this thing cleaned up on the side. It contacts this thing through the threads, but in between this nut and this nut on the outside, sandwiched between them will be the wire that goes to the coil, or more accurately, the one that comes from the coil. I want this thing nice and tight, snugged up real good. And then the outside guy, same thing. You only really need one side cleaned up, but this will be the inside side. Now this guy I'm just going to put on there loosely because I don't have the coil wire yet. Alright, so the condenser guy goes on there. Then we have our burnished points for the bottom. I feel like we came in here putting down these points. She found home. There's the lock screw for the points. So we're going to use the grabby screwdriver here. Get that started in the threads there. Now I'm leaving that loose because we still have to adjust the points. Now here's the top of the points. Now this thing I have not cleaned yet, so I got to burnish these ones. All right, that's about as good as I can get them. It's enough to make it pop, that's for sure. I will be ordering new points for this. I'll clean some of the dust out of this thing. Now, this part of the point is something you really want to pay attention to. This is the part that rides on the cam lobe of the distributor shaft. Now, this can wear down if it's not lubricated. It will wear down if it's not lubricated. So there's 2 points to the point, 2 areas of the points you'd like to lubricate. One is I like to put a little dab of distributor grease in there and a little dab on the shaft, and it's easier to put on before the upper part of the points are in place. So now to grease the distributor shaft and this, there really is, you know, there's some folks who say grease is grease is grease. Whatever grease you use, don't use too much on this, obviously, because it can get into the points and then you'll have real problems. But a light layer of light grease is what works best on these. And if you were to say, hey Eric, what should I use on mine? What's the best stuff to use? I have found that this stuff is the best. So look that up, order you a tube. It'll last probably your lifetime. You don't use that much at all. The best way to apply it to that distributor shaft is with a Q-tip. I don't have Q-tips out in the garage, so I have to go in and steal them out of my wife's bathroom, and as long as they don't look too dirty, I just sneak them back in there, so no one knows the difference. Now I'm not putting gobs of this stuff on, I am just putting a real thin layer. The convenient part is that I didn't put the hold downs on this. So I'm able to turn this every which way so I can get it. Like I said, I'm just getting her coated, a light coating. And this stuff sticks really well. So while I'm at it, I'm gonna get a little bit, I'm gonna put it on the pivot shaft for the points. Just make them that much slicker. Kind of snotty, you know? When my uncle goes to restaurants and he orders eggs, and they ask him how he wants his eggs, he always says, I want them snotty like the waitress. So, it's never worked well for me, but I just kind of think that maybe Uncle Steve's had some spit in his eggs. I don't know. It seems like a possibility. The points and the condenser are connected, tightened down. The dust cover fits perfectly on there, so that's not in the way. Just gonna make sure. This one's actually easier because it's not open on the bottom. It's a round hole connector, which you don't really see those too often. Anyway, so now we've got to set the point gap. And to set the point gap, you've got to get this thing right on the cam lobe. I'll get you closer in here so you can see it. So you see this guy I'm talking about, the one that can wear down if you're not careful. That's what opens and closes the point, so that if it wears down or wears at all, that these won't open correctly. I'm not looking at any factory spec book, but when I set the gap on points in old Internationals with Delco distributors, of which this is an old International motor, this is a Delco distributor, I like to get between 18 and 20 thousandths, which I always shoot for 19, and I always seem to grab the feeler gauge set that doesn't have a 19. Okay, so to gap these things, you get to the highest part of the gap, which would be about right there, it looks like. We didn't tighten that down, so when you turn this screw, it moves the bottom part of the points. So you can see as it comes around, it opens. It's actually the other way around. This thing spins and the distributor stays steady, but just for what we're doing here, that's what it opens on, is that cam lobe. So you put it here and you can set your gap. So you just set the feeler gauge in there. She's too tight. She's too loose now. Tighten it up. And it should just feel a slight drag on that thing. And I like them at 19, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just a little bit loose on that 18. Not a lot. So we're gonna call that a, let's see, now that's a problem. You gotta, sometimes when you tighten them up, you lose a little, or it opens it up a little bit. So you always gotta double check it. There it is. All right, so we've got the points set. Now, something about points that it seems that not a lot of people understand is that the tighter the point gap, the hotter the spark. But you also want to balance it so you're not just burning up points. Now, the dust cover has this felt here, this felt ring, so I like to oil that a little bit. You're not trying to douse it, you're just trying to, it keeps out moisture, but especially dust. Dust will just kind of trap around the edges of it. And it keeps the distributor shaft nice and lubricated. Now I had a little bit come on the inside there, so gotta wipe that off. You don't need oil near the points. And here we go. All right. Many steps closer to a running tractor here. This is the eroder that was on there. Found this one in a box. It looks new, really. It might be lightly used. No, I don't think that's ever been used, so we'll use that. The rotor is the same as the early 50s International trucks, the LR and S series, and actually the Green Diamonds too. When you get into the A series, and they started getting into the taller distributor cap, but that's neither here nor there. Okay, so we're at this point. Let's take a look at the distributor cap. Here's our distributor cap. This is the AC Delco guy. Now, this thing, you can see all of these posts have a ton of corrosion. That stuff will immobilize the motor. And then if you look in here, some of them you can see some shiny copper, but there's a lot of corrosion in there as well. So the inside, again, MVP. This thing will make this like new on the inside. Okay, so there is slightly rough spots on those, but that really is shiny copper all the way around. You do not want to do anything to that guy. Don't rub on that. It's fine how it is. That's a carbon button, and you will just gouge into it and it will disappear. So on these guys, there's a different brush. I like to use these brushes. You can get them down in there and then they just spread out and start cleaning off the walls, which is what the connection actually contacts. So I like to put it in there before I start it. Oh, I hope you can see that in there. It is nice and clean. I get that. There you go. Now you can see it. See how clean that is now? I'll do this one real quick. You can see that. You see that stuff coming out of it. See how she's cleaning up in there? Yeah. I'm not saying not to get a new distributor cap, but what I am saying is, as a guy who's driven stuff out of a junkyard thousands of miles home, this will get you home. All right, I'm gonna clean up the rest of these and we'll get going on it. All right, now it's time for some wires. So it's pointed that way. This thing turns clockwise. So if I remember correctly, when I took it apart, we had number 2. It was closest to number 2. So I'm gonna put number 2 here. Okay. And of course the firing order is 1, 3, 4, 2. It goes clockwise. That means this hydraulic hose is in the way. 4. 1, 3, 4, 2. Okay. All right, I'm gonna run some wires real quick and we'll start timing this thing. Okay, let's time this thing. Now, to do that, we take off number 1 there. I'm gonna pull this distributor cap off. Set it down out of the way so that I can see which way this thing is pointing. I'm gonna pull number 1 spark plug out of there. All right. Now, luckily, I can reach my finger into this hole and I can hit the starter button at the same time. I could put my finger in here and I'm gonna try to move my arm up so you can see this thing, but whichever way this is pointing, when it blows my finger off of here, that tells me when top dead center is when it's on a compression stroke, but it tells me when this, whatever direction the rotor is pointing, tells me that's when this is in firing position. Right there, it's pointing that way. So, go through and adjust all these wires. Put this plug back in. Plug wire back on. All right, so we're close now. This thing will probably start how it is right now, or at least fire. But what we're gonna do, instead of using a timing light or anything like that, we're gonna do what I prefer to do, which is called static timing. Static timing is, it's just basically by the numbers. It's not, you know, it's not by feel. It's just, you get a good base timing and you can adjust it from there if you want to. I usually do. Like with the trucks, it seems like I'll static time my truck and then I'll advance it a few degrees from there. Just how it feels when I'm driving it, accelerating up hills, whatever. You know, retarded if it needs to, you know, if you're slowing down, like bogging down too much on hills, whatever. But with a tractor, static timing is typically more accurate right as a base timing because it doesn't perform the same way as a truck, if that makes sense. I'm not gonna get too into it, but anyway. So now we know, you know, basically where it is. So the first part of static timing is there's marks on the crankshaft pulley. And so we have to crank the motor over until we line up that mark with a pointer that's on the timing cover. Now the reason I showed you the slack inside of this thing, how it'll go back and forth, that is because when you're turning this thing over, you need to have all the slack out of it. Because when the motor's spinning, it has the slack already taken out of it. It's at the front end of all that slack. So if you go past it, you can't go back. It's easier to do with the tractor anyway because I'm going to be using the hand crank to turn it over, and you can't go backwards with the hand crank because it has a ratchet built into it. But with a truck, you can go backwards. Now, it's not the end of the world if you have to go backwards. And a lot of guys will say, well, once you've gone past it, you have to go around another 2 times. Because with a 4-stroke motor, you have to go 2 cycles because it's half of each cycle is a stroke. So here's the deal. You don't have to necessarily go all the way back around with a truck, but you do have to go back far enough to pull in all the slack and then come back around to it. Anyway, I don't want to get too into the weeds comparing trucks and tractors because we're working on a tractor. So I am going to line up the timing marks on the crankshaft pulley and we're going to talk about it. So I have the distributor cover off. Let's see here. All right. And it is basically pointing towards right where number 1 is. So number 1 is right there. If you take it off, it's pointing towards it, all right? Now coming over to this side of the tractor. All right, let's see if we can get her to focus in on here. You can see the pointer there that's on the timing cover, and there's 2 notches there. Now, I believe the second one is top dead center, but you want to time it to the first one. I believe the second one is for timing a magneto so it doesn't break your arm, but with the distributor you can time it to the front one. So we've got her all set up there. Now it's time to static time it. Now with the timing mark where we want it on the pulley, We have the distributor in the neighborhood of where it needs to be. The next part is to get the thing dialed in. So you just get a timing light. This is just a homemade one I have. I had a comment in another video, it doesn't matter what color. These are just plastic. They're just alligator clips. This is just a 12-volt instrument bulb. One end goes to ground. One end goes to the distributor. Let's see if I can get this light to be somewhere where it's visible, but also kind of not in the way, if that makes sense. Let's see here. All right, so the pulley's where I want it, which means the motor is where I want it. The distributor itself is in the neighborhood. So now when I turn on the ignition, if this light is off, that means that the points are closed. And since this distributor turns clockwise, it's very important to know. You have to know which way your distributor turns. And so what's going to happen is I'm going to turn on the ignition, and since this turns clockwise, I'm going to turn it counterclockwise against it until the light comes on. Slowly, there it is. Then I turn it back, it's off, right there. Turn off the ignition. We should be dead on the money. So I'm going to tighten on the distributor and let's see if this thing starts. All right, let's see if this sucker starts. Give it a little gas. That seems like a success to me. I'm gonna get this thing put together now, and we're gonna go terrorize my neighborhood. All right, so she runs like a nose. Some problems I'm seeing already. Transmission sounds pretty dry, or there's a lot of water in it, so I got to deal with that. Obviously it's just wired up to run. That's just an on switch, and there's no charging yet. Gotta go through hydraulics. We'll get there. That is a residual. That's not a leak. That's from when I was putting the hoses on. It leaked a little bit there, but the hoses are dry. However, I got this towel on here because the pump is leaking out of the shaft seal, at least up there. It looks like it did from there at one point. And this thing is really, really wobbly. So I have to go through and tighten this up. The steering shaft in here past the joint could use some collars. I think that would help tighten it up, but also all of this needs to just, I need to go over it and just make sure she's tight, because she is squirrely going down the road in road gear. And I want to terrorize my neighborhood with this thing, so it's got to be able to do that safely. The other thing, well, obviously the lights need to be wired up. That's just sitting there. I've got a better light for it. But the big one is this, the M&W hand clutch. One of the coolest things on here, but at the same time, it needs to at least be adjusted, probably taken completely apart and cleaned, because it's not cutting it right now. It's really loose and wobbly. Obviously, going through the transmission, I've got to open it up anyway to put the 9-speed in it, but I'm interested to see how dry and rusty it is on the inside of here, so we'll see. So anyway, that's one down. Got the H going. Got she rips. junkyard motor is a winner. So, and those are just flat top pistons. I'm not real sure what the bore is. I didn't check that. But anyway, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. That really helps me out. I really appreciate you watching, and I'll see you in the next video.